Youth, depression, and anxiety. My name is Rob Gallardi, and I'm on the new Diocese of Monterey Youth and Young Adult Ministry team. The formation team, which I'm a member of, decided on this topic because we saw the need in our parishes, and Director Father Harrison, who you will meet later, knew of a great person to come and address the topic. So the last half hour of this session is going to be question and answer. But we will finish with an introduction of Father Harrison, whom you all should get to know. And then we have a closing prayer and finish at 8:30. We'd like to take a few moments to reflect on why we are here this evening as we open in prayer, and I invite you to pray with me. In the name of the Father, and the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Dear God, during this pandemic, we see and experience sadness. Give us the grace to comfort those who share our sorrow. Grace us with your joy, that we may be thankful for all you give us, and that we may in turn give joy to the sorrowful. Bless those who despair from loss and hardship due to the pandemic. Help us to give hope to those who walk in fear. And in these times of discord, heal those who are enslaved by hate and resentment. Empower your servants to be instruments of peace, sowing love, understanding, and call for forgiveness. Grace us with the ability to forgive those who injure us. Empower us, Lord, to die to our own anxieties and reach out to those enslaved by theirs. May we find life in serving you, in loving those who are hurting and grieving. And thank you, Lord, for giving us this opportunity tonight to learn how to help those in need. Thank you for our families and all those who love and support us. Thank you for your blessed church and for the guidance of your Spirit. And we ask all these things through your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The way this is going to go tonight is that if you have any questions during the session, please type them into the comment area of your YouTube screen. We won't be able to answer them right away, but we're going to be saving them up, and we will be addressing them in the Q&A period after the main presentation. Jordan Lewis, who is also a member of the Diocesan Formation Team, is the Director of Faith Formation at St. Angela's in Pacific Grove, and has done an awesome job in putting together this event. And Jordan will next introduce our speaker, and he will be fielding the questions from viewers. I now turn the screen over to Jordan.
Thank you very much, Paul. It is my pleasure to join everyone tonight here in the Diocese of Monterey. And if you're watching from beyond the Diocese of Monterey, thank you for joining us. We've come together tonight to talk about youth, about depression, about anxiety. And I think now more than ever, we need to have this discussion about how we can reach out to young people who are dealing with these complex emotional situations, and what our faith can offer us as a way to deal with these issues. And tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Paul Brogan. He is a marriage and family therapist who works in Encino, California, and he teaches in the psychology department at Mount St. Mary's University. His teachings include teachings about loss and grief, trauma, alcohol and drug abuse, bullying, and truancy, things that all of the youth in our diocese might face at one point or another. He is originally trained in psychology and holistic development, and we have the honor of welcoming him here tonight. I have the privilege of saying that I've enjoyed getting to know him over the past few weeks as we have worked together to put this talk together so that together all of us can move forward and work with our youth here in the Diocese of Monterey. And so now I'm happy to turn the screen over to Paul, who will impart his knowledge to us.
Jordan, thank you very much for that very kind welcome. And I'm very, very happy to be here with you this evening. And thank you also to Father Gerson for this very kind invitation to be of service to the people in beautiful Northern California. So what we're going to do this evening is we're going to look at adolescence, and we're going to particularly focus on how adolescents cope with depression and anxiety. So before we jump into that, we're going to focus a little bit firstly on the teenage brain, what happens in the adolescent brain. Then we're going to look at a definition of anxiety and a definition of depression. And then we are going to jump into very concrete tools and techniques to help people with anxiety and depression. So our focus this evening is basically a biopsychosocial focus. We're going to look at the biology, the body of the person. We're going to look at the psycho of the person, the mind, the spirit. And then we're going to look at the social aspect of the person. In other words, the young adult or the adolescent in his or her community. So we're going to cover everything from those three concepts, the biopsychosocial model. And it's very important really to start there, because depression and anxiety have to be truly understood in that model, biopsychosocial. Some also call it the muscle, mind, and mouth. So focusing on the body, on the muscle, on the mind, and on the mouth. Not just what I say through my mouth, but also on nutrition as well. Tends to go down a little bit better with adolescents, that muscle, mind, and mouth. So the word adolescence itself is an ancient word. We see references to it in medieval writings. The word adolescent itself, it comes from Latin, which means to grow out of or to mature. The concept of adolescence as an actual phase of development is, however, very, very new. It was first mentioned in 1904 by a gentleman called Stanley Hall. Now, Stanley Hall was the first president of the American Psychological Association. So back around 1904, great things were happening in child labor laws and also in access to universal education. So we had kids who were going to school more, into elementary schools and also into high schools. And also we had children not working anymore in factories or on farms. So there was this cohort group to study. So the American Psychological Association really started focusing in on this, and particularly Stanley Hall. So he is the one attributed with the first definition of adolescence. And I want to read it out to you because it's absolutely, it's very interesting what he said adolescence is all about. So he said, society needs to, and I quote, burn out the vestiges of evil in their nature. So he saw that society needs to burn out the vestiges of evil in their nature. So very interesting quote. I'm sure that gentleman was very happy gentleman. I'm sure his teenager children loved him, and I'm sure he got invited to many parties. But since then, we have very much changed our understanding of adolescence. And a lot of that happened with great movements in the 1940s and 1950s with Erik Erikson, with Piaget, even with Freud, great movements to understand more the complex phase of adolescence. By the 1950s, adolescence had been broken down into three phases. Then as we moved towards the 1970s, 1980s onwards, we saw a big movement in creating youth development programs, specialized training for adults who are working with youth to fully understand what was going on in the minds of young people at the stage, to try and understand and harness that great, expansive energy that was happening in the adolescent brain. So I want to read you another understanding of adolescence, and the description is as such. I quote, "The children now love luxury. They have bad manners. They have contempt for authority. They show disrespect for their elders, and they love to talk in place of exercising. Children now are tyrants. They're not the servants of their household. They no longer get up when adults enter the room. They contradict their parents. They chatter in front of company, and they eat up all the food at their tables. They cross their legs and they give their teachers a hard time. So that was written by Socrates over 2,000 years ago. So he can see that this is something that could be written very recently by teachers who work with adolescents. So what we're seeing is, in a beautiful way, nothing has really changed. And we see that as we understand the adolescent brain. So the first part of our talk this evening, we're going to have a little look at the adolescent brain, because to fully understand anxiety and depression, we have to look at what goes on in the adolescent brain. So for our purposes this evening, I'm going to invite you just to raise your fist like this, just like this, raise it up, yeah, in a non-threatening manner. Very good. Okay. So the closed fist is almost a symbol or a metaphor for the adolescent brain. Back here, you have your spinal cord, your corpus callosum. Here, you also have your limbic system, where your thumb is there. Out here, where your fingers you have your prefrontal cortex, and we'll be looking at that a lot this evening. And you have your frontal lobe here on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side. So we're going to be focusing a lot on the limbic system, because the limbic system is fully developed in the adolescent brain. So the brain in girls tends to stop growing at around age 10, and in boys at around age 14. So the brain is fully grown in an adolescent, but it's not fully mature. So there's a big difference between growth and maturity. So let's go back here to the limbic system. Few things that are very important in the limbic system, and a few areas that are very important. The first area is the amygdala. So the amygdala is almost where your thumbnail would be, and it's in the center of the limbic system. The word amygdala comes from almond, because it's sort of an almond-shaped, it's the almond-shaped center of the limbic system. So all of the information we receive in through our senses goes in through the amygdala first. So it goes through the amygdala into the limbic system, and eventually goes out and reaches the frontal cortex. So information travels from the back of the brain into the front of the brain. Another part of the limbic system that is very important in the understanding of adolescence is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for memory and learning. So it's like a filing cabinet or a classroom in the adolescent brain. So the hippocampus is also there at the back, and very, very important. As kids learn, the hippocampus actually expands. We'll be looking to what happens later on with stress and the hippocampus. In the midbrain section, and just beside the hippocampus, we're going to be looking a lot tonight at something called the basal ganglia, which is one of the reward centers of the brain, and also the striatum, right in there, right beside the basal ganglia. So that's the reward center of the brain. That's like the Las Vegas center of the brain. And out here then, once again, we're looking at the prefrontal cortex and the orbital frontal cortex. The orbital frontal cortex is the most advanced part of the brain. It's right over your left eyelid and over your right eyelid. So basically over the orbits of your brain. So the most advanced part of the brain is over the left eyelid and the right eyelid, called the orbital frontal cortex. So we have the prefrontal cortex, and then we have some subdivisions in and of itself. The orbital frontal cortex is growing and growing up until about age 25, even age 26. And even now, as we're looking, some scientists are saying it's growing actually even up to 29 and 30. The most advanced part of the brain. For example, if a teenager or an 18-year-old goes to get insurance, insurance companies know that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed up till age 25. So that's why the rates for adolescents are very, very, very high. So once we turn 25, there is an assumption that the frontal cortex is fully developed and that we are more mature. So we technically are more mature at age 25. So let's go back to the prefrontal cortex. So the limbic system totally developed for the adolescent brain. Frontal cortex is growing but has not matured. So what we notice in adolescence is that we notice for 14, 15, and 16-year-olds a great ability to understand concepts, a great ability to understand abstract thinking. Almost with adolescence, you have to think of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity. So I want freedom, I want equality, and I want fraternity. I want to be with my peers. So it's almost as if the orbital frontal cortex for the first time has taken on those three concepts and it's running with them. So it absolutely starts firing around here when the teenagers take on these very advanced concepts. Now, one of the things with the orbital frontal cortex is even though it can understand it, the back part of the brain, the limbic part of the brain, is not necessarily connected with that part of the brain. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you talk to a teenager and say, hey, should I go into a store and steal a bottle of water? The teenager is going to say, no, of course you should not. One does not do that. That is not right. That is not fair. However, let's go back to the striatum and the basal ganglia. If a teenager is with a crowd of friends and the friends are saying, hey, come on, let's do that. Let's just steal for the fun of it. Let's activate our basal ganglia and our striatum. The teenager is likely to go ahead and steal the water. Now, they have the knowledge that it's wrong. It's just that this part of the brain is not connected. So the frontal cortex and the connections back to the striatum and the nucleus accumbens are not yet fully meshed. So we have a disconnect in the teenage brain. So think of the limbic system back here like an accelerator on your car. Think of the prefrontal cortex like the brake. So teenagers are very likely to keep the brake, the accelerator going, and very light-footed on the brake. So what happens as teenagers grow? Well, there is a thing that is the neurons back here are growing towards the front part of the brain. So the front part, the prefrontal cortex, has come on stream, but it's not yet connected. So there's a process called myelination. And myelination basically is all of these neurons are suddenly wrapped in a white fatty protein that allows messages to be sped from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. That takes a period of time. So it's like me, for example, taking a pen here and getting a tissue. So myelination is happening so that the neurons are getting myelinated from the back to the front gradually during my adolescence. Now, once the neurons are myelinated, messages happen, impulses travel much, much faster between the limbic system and through the frontal cortex. So many times, for example, if you said to me, should I go into a store and steal water? As an adult, I'd say no. And if I'm with some of my friends and they say, Paul, would you go ahead and steal the bottle of water? As an adult, I'm going to say no. That's not because I'm more honest. It's just because I'm myelinated. So I just have a lot more myelinated. So it's not really that I'm more honest or it's because I'm Irish or anything like that. It's just having to do with that fatty tissue, that white tissue that's wrapped around all of the neurons firing in my brain. So myelination is very, very important. What often happens with the unmyelinated brain and the experiences that kids have with their peers can cause a lot of anxiety and depression about how they are treated by some of these impulsive things that they choose to do. Another thing that's happening in the adolescent brain is pruning. So we have 1 billion neurons in our brain and trillions of synapses. In other words, we have all these pathways in our brain that are constantly firing. The adolescent brain is absolutely alive. One of the things that starts happening in the adolescent brain is that the adolescent brain becomes very efficient. It keeps the neurons that are working and it starts pruning the neurons that are not working. So to give you an example, growing up, I lived beside a family and the adolescents were raised to speak French. They were Irish like myself, but the parents raised them to speak French. So as they were learning to speak French daily and learning about French culture and French food and learning all of the aspects of the language, you know, the nouns, pronouns, prepositions and whatnot, hundreds and hundreds of neurons were firing at the one time. Now, I was not raised to learn French, so a lot of those neurons in my brain were being pruned. In other words, the body was saying, hey, you're not working those, let's prune them. So we called it use it or lose it. So my neighbors were here learning to speak French. The only thing we were doing is we were eating French fries. That just requires 2 or 3 neurons, let's say. And those ones I've continued to use even up to yesterday. So those neurons have not been fired or have not been pruned. So a lot of pruning is going on. And the adolescent brain is looking at what is good and what is bad. Is it good for me to do something good, like learning a language, or is it good for me to do something like just sit around and eat a lot of French fries? Whatever is focused on in the brain, that is what will develop. So that's why youth work is so, so important, that we expose the children and the adolescents to as many types of education as absolutely possible, because if these areas aren't accessed, what starts happening is that pruning, and then there's that pruning starts happening at a very, very early stage. And then once an adolescent reaches adulthood, those neural pathways are essentially not as available as they would have been before. So a lot of those things are happening. So let's go back, and we want to look a little bit at the reward system and in the brain. So let's go back to our nucleus accumbens and our striatum. Very, very important in the for the adolescent brain. The nucleus accumbens, the reward system, is much more sensitive in the adolescent brain than it is in the brain of a young person or in the brain of an adult. So that causes the adolescent to seek out new behaviors. That is what's wonderful about adolescence. There is this idea that something new is good. So the adolescent is more prone to seek out new behaviors, go to new lands, try new things than older people like myself. So the adolescent brain is hypersensitive to rewards and loves to be rewarded, and it's also highly sensitive to stress at the same time. So what often happens in the stressed brain is that when the brain experiences a lot of stress, if the young adult doesn't have a good prefrontal cortex development of right for wrong, many times what they do is they go back into that loop, that rewarded part of the brain. They seek out rewards that may or may not be good for them. So we see a strong correlation between stress and reward-seeking behaviors, pleasure-seeking behaviors. And that is our big concern with young adults. Our adolescents at many times is that's when they are likely to experiment with drugs, experiment with behaviors that are rewarding for them, but they're not good in and of themselves. So that can be a very big cause of anxiety and depression, an inability to think things through, and then a disposition to seek out behaviors that are not healthy. We know, for example, that 9 out of 10 people who are living with addictions started their addictions in adolescence. We know, for example, that most alcoholics start drinking for the first time when they are 13. So they're trying to understand and cope with depression, but they go into that reward system looking for something that's going to make them feel good, as opposed to something that they know to be good, that is objectively good in and of itself. And that's where we come in as adults. That's where we come in by guiding them through all of this and helping them understand. We say that neurons that fire together wire together. So if I'm in pain and I don't know how to understand it, I'm likely to try and self-soothe, and in that way make many, many bad choices. So our goal is, as adults, to help young adults, help adolescents understand what is going on so that we can guide them through those stages. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to look into what depression, how do we actually define depression, what it is, and how do we define it, and both depression and anxiety. So where do we go when we're experiencing anxiety and depression? Well, the first place we normally go is we talk to a young adult or an adolescent is likely to talk to a therapist or to their doctor. So what the doctor or the therapist will do, they will go to the DSM-5 and they will look at the criteria as to what depression is and what it's not. So in the DSM-5, which is freely available online, there is a list of criteria that you look for when you're assessing for depression. So for example, for depression, what we look for is the presence of up to 9 symptoms that are present in an adolescent for 5 of these 9 have to be present for 2 weeks and up to a period of a year. So one of the things with depression and anxiety in young people is we want to figure out, is this acute? Is this just something they're going through? Are they having a bad weekend? Or is this something chronic? Is this something going on for an extended period of time? And that's where the pediatrician and the therapist does their assessment. You're probably very familiar with some of these symptoms already, but some of them include significant weight gain or weight loss, decrease in appetite of more than 5% of body weight, insomnia, fatigue, lack of energy. And the concerning ones that we all look out for as adults are feelings of worthlessness and guilt. So these are the big things to look out for: feelings of worthlessness and guilt, and recurrent thoughts of suicide or death. So recurrent thoughts of suicide or death, but feelings of worthlessness or guilt, and finally a feeling of hopelessness. These are the key things that we look for when we're doing an assessment for depression in young people. One of the best things you can do is to send the young person to their doctor, because many health problems manifest as depression. So because the adolescent is growing, what we see many times is we see a spurt in growth in the thyroid gland. So many times we can have an overactive thyroid, and the symptoms of an overactive thyroid are very similar to reported symptoms of anxiety. An underactive thyroid the reported symptoms are very, very similar to the symptoms of depression. So what we want to do is send the adolescent to the doctor, and he or she will check the family history of thyroid, and they will also check the growth of the thyroid gland itself. They can actually test to see, is the thyroid overactive or underactive. Many times I've met with people who are depressed or are anxious, and once they do the full medical, they just say, hey, this is purely a medical issue that is manifesting the same symptoms as depression. Another thing that's very, very common in adolescents is anemia. So the lack of red blood cells. So once again, the doctor will be able to test for that. The doctor will do what's called a CMP, a comprehensive metabolic panel, and that will check for the levels of glucose, potassium, and sodium. Also, the doctor will check for sleep apnea. And finally, the doctor will check to see, is the young adult having adverse reactions to medications that they're on, prescriptions that they're on, or non-prescriptions. They will just want to see, is there something else going on in the bio part of the brain? So that is depression. So while anxiety also manifests physically in a similar way. So what we look for anxiety is excessive worry and an anticipation of something bad that's going to happen. So we call that catastrophizing. We also see a lot of restlessness. They're easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating, irritability, a lot of muscle tension, or sometimes we talk about pains in places that they don't have places. So a lot of sometimes things that surface as hypochondria. Also, they are sleeping too much or they're not sleeping enough. Once again, first port of call is the pediatrician. We want to have a look at anemia, hypoglycemia. We want to do the blood panel. We want to check levels of glucose just to see is the body out of whack because perhaps a little growth spurt. So we want to assess, is this acute or is this chronic? And that's in the biopsychosocial. Well, a very easy way to talk with adolescents about this catastrophizing is a simple little thing like this. Okay, so here we have 2 bottles of water. And let's say you go into your favorite store. I was going to say liquor store, but your favorite 7-Eleven. So you go into your favorite 7-Eleven, and both of these are sitting side by side in the cooler. They're both $1. Now, which one are you likely to grab? And of course, you're all probably likely to grab the one with the label. Why would we not grab this one? Well, of course, most of us will look at it and say it doesn't have a label. So what happens in the mind is the amygdala gets excited and it goes, I don't know what's in that. So this could be dangerous. This could be poison. Somebody could have tampered with it. Somebody could have spat into it. Some bad person could have done something to it. So in less than a second, our amygdala back here in our limbic system, remember the almond-shaped little organ in the limbic system, that gets inflamed, and all of a sudden this catastrophizing starts. So that happens in 27th of a second. When in anxiety, the amygdala gets inflamed, it triggers the hypothalamus to trigger the pituitary gland, to trigger the adrenal gland, to start pumping epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. So these are our big friends in anxiety: epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. So the adrenal gland starts flooding the body with these 3 neurotransmitters in 27th of a second. So in less than a minute, I've turned from being meek and mild to wild. All of a sudden, I'm imagining, I'm catastrophizing, and I can't stop focusing on the threat that this bottle may have for me. So that excessive thinking, if that continues for a long period of time and I'm staring at the bottle and imagining, my adrenal gland continues to pump those neurotransmitters, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol, into my bloodstream, and my body will find it very, very hard to relax. We say that it takes up even to 4 hours for the body to metabolize those neurotransmitters. So it's 7:30 right now. So if I'm feeling threatened, I'm probably going to start calming down around 11:30. If I keep focusing on it, if I keep focusing on the stressor, I keep compounding the level of these neurotransmitters that are active in my body. So the amygdala triggers the hypothalamus, which triggers the pituitary, which triggers the adrenal gland to start this anxiety reaction. We call that the sympathetic nervous system. 27th of a second, I've turned into Thor. I am not thinking right now, I am feeling, and it is very, very hard for me to relax myself. So the inflammatory system is the sympathetic nervous system. The calming system is the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's how I calm myself down. That takes time. It takes more time for teenagers than it does from adults, because so much of that calming system comes from my advanced training out here, my advanced learned techniques, that my advanced concepts that are out here in my frontal cortex, particularly in my orbital frontal cortex. So sympathetic nervous system, 27th of a second, constant exposure to that anxiety-provoking thought, that anxiety-provoking situation means that it's very, very hard for me to self-soothe and calm myself down. That's where we come in. So what we're going to be looking at right now, and Jordan, whenever you're ready, we're going to jump into some tools and techniques that are actually going to help myself activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Remember the parasympathetic nervous, think of the paramedics, you know, if there's a crisis and the paramedics turn up, we all start to relax. We all start to calm down and we say, okay, there's help here. And then we know then the body starts to go into a period of relaxation. Once again, it is much easier for us as adults to calm ourselves down than it is for adolescents. However, what we do know is that the more skills and tools that adolescents have, the faster it is that they can actually calm themselves down. So we're going to look at number 1 here, and we're going to go through those. And just to let you know too, folks, that after our presentation tonight, you are going to have access to everything I've spoken about. You're going to have this handout you're currently looking at. You're also going to get a book. I sound like Oprah, don't I? You're also going to get a booklet that talks about cognitive behavioral therapy. Or I sound like someone on QVC. And number 3, you are going to get a fantastic handout called Safe Coping Skills that has 83 tools in it. And the second part of that handout is going to talk about grounding. And there are 30 ways, 30 tools there to help you ground. So don't be too anxious about the information as we fly through it this evening, because those 3 handouts, the one you're looking at, the cognitive behavioral booklet, and the Safe Coping Skills, they're all available to you, and they'll be at a link at the bottom of our YouTube channel. So you're going to have time to go over this. So don't overly worry about it because you're going to have this in front of you. Remember, as we said before, information brings down anxiety. So, just as much as, for example, this company, Dasani, they flood us with information because they want us to be relaxed. So what do we do to make people relaxed? Well, we go back and we look at what do we do in business. Look at Dasani here. They have so much, we know it's water, but they're giving me so much information to try and relax me, to reassure me that this is water. They're giving me contact numbers. They're giving me a website. They're telling me everything about this because they know that if I have information, my anxiety goes down and also my depression goes down. So information is the best drug on the market. Information, information, information. If we're dealing with adolescents and just expecting them to understand things without explaining it to them, without giving them information, we're going to create more anxiety than ever. So as we know with adults, information brings down anxiety. So what are we going to look at first? Well, when we're dealing with anxiety, is there any way, Jordan, you could go in a little bit closer on that? Is that possible? If you could, that would be great. Okay, hey, wonderful. We are winning here. So one of my favorite proverbs is, anxiety weighs down the heart and a kind word lifts it up. I think that's one of my favorite, because in its simplicity, it is absolutely so profound. Anxiety does weigh down the heart because suddenly I'm flooded with epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol. A kind word that comes from up here, someone speaking to me and tending to me, does in fact activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So we see how beautiful this proverb is. So with anxiety and depression, the first things we all want to do is focus on prevention, but above all, we want to focus on safety and we want to give resources. Of course, as we know, if young people are talking about any sort of suicidal ideation, we need to address it immediately. We need to talk to them immediately. The best way is to actually ask them, are you thinking of harming yourself? Are you thinking of killing yourself? We want to do an assessment to see, have they a method, means, and motivation? Do they have a plan in place? Are they actively talking about that? And if they do have a plan in place, what we do is what we call a 5150. We take them to the nearest emergency facility, or we just call 911 and they will send a PEP team, a psychiatric emergency team that includes a police officer and a social worker, and they will help the person. They will take the person to a safe place. So we cannot be dismissive anyway of adolescents, if they're talking about suicide, we have to act on that immediately. So safety, safety, and safety. So we looked at working on the muscle, the mind, and the mouth. So it's very important that we understand anxiety too as a power surge. So as I'm staring at this bottle, not knowing where it's from, and imagining, catastrophizing, thinking that someone is trying to possibly kill me with some sort of fluid that's inside that could harm me, as I'm doing that, I do have this power surge. Remember, it's the sympathetic nervous system. I have my epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. My adrenal gland is pumping them, and cortisol is flooding my system. Epinephrine gets my heart to race faster, norepinephrine constricts my blood vessels, And cortisol floods, especially into the frontal part of my brain, keeping me alert, keeping me hypervigilant, and preparing me for any oncoming threat. Exposure to cortisol, as we said, over an extended period of time is absolutely very damaging. One of the big things actually in this power surge that we need to be very careful about is that if kids are stressed out too much, their hippocampus is impacted. And their frontal lobe is impacted. So cortisol actually damages a child's ability to learn, to learn back here in the hippocampus, to understand out here in the frontal lobe and the prefrontal lobe, and to retain memory in the hippocampus. So cortisol is very, very dangerous for learning. And so that's why stress many times is, a stressed out adolescent is in a very precarious position, because many times behind anxiety and depression, we have stress. So stress is really, really the big issue. So that's what we're looking at here. So let's jump on to number 4 here. Depression often points to unmet needs. As we know with adolescence, the big need is to leave home and be accepted by the peers. We're all familiar with that. Like God said, go forth and multiply. So all of a sudden, the young person seeking independence wants to move away from mom and dad and go and interact with other people. Now, evolutionary, that has been absolutely wonderful, because for thousands upon thousands of years, adolescents have left the tribes and gone to other parts of the world, and that has ensured our survival. In fact, there is this chromosomal pull inside all of us to seek out partners in other tribes, so to create a very rich chromosomal pool and to prevent inbreeding in our own society. So that call to go forth and multiply, go forth as in like go far away and multiply, actually has an evolutionary side to it that's very, very important. We're seeing that coming up now with people as they're doing this, as they're checking out their 23andMe and Ancestry.com, as they're going back looking at their family of origin. I was talking recently to a friend of mine who's in Veneto, Italy, and he was saying he just did one of these tests, and he said, I thought I was Italian forever. And as he looked at it, he could actually trace that he was from Veneto, then he had family in Bosnia, he had ancestors in Bosnia, Herzegovina, in Greece, and all the way back to Ethiopia. So he could see that this go forth and multiply, as adolescents moved and found partners right throughout those regions of land, that has allowed him now to live in Italy, but he can see his heritage. So in other words, for thousands and thousands of years, we have gone forth and multiplied. We joke in my family that if we were to do that, what we wouldn't find is people from Bosnia Herzegovina, but we would find a lot of Guinness, Jamesons, Baileys, and some Kerrygold thrown in there for good measure. So if we were to do that, we would probably find that. But anyway, go forth and multiply. It's very, very important. So why do we focus on that as much for teenagers? Teenagers want to be with their peers. They want to be accepted. They want to belong to their peers. When teenagers feel that they're with their friends and they feel that they're loved, 2 neurotransmitters start firing. One is dopamine and one is serotonin. So serotonin is one of the many functions of serotonin is to increase my mood. So a lot of serotonin is going to make me feel happy. Dopamine is part of the reward hormone, and dopamine makes me feel very connected. So if someone invites me into their group, into their circle, my level of dopamine goes up and my level of serotonin goes up. Another hormone that's also present in teenagers is oxytocin. So we have this other neurotransmitter as well too. We call it the cuddle hormone. We call it the come closer dear hormone. So when people feel close to someone, so when a teenager starts hanging out with a group of friends and is accepted, serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin are flowing through their bloodstream. So They're feeling good and they're feeling very, very happy about themselves. Similarly, if a teenager is rejected, thrown out of the group, thrown out of the friends by their peers, we see low levels of serotonin, low levels of oxytocin, and low level of dopamine. So many times, one of the biggest indicators of depression is a young person not wanting to connect with the group, or indeed feeling disconnected from the group. So the desire to disconnect, the desire to go forth and meet others may still be there, but the person cannot find people. So adolescents, as we know, really want to be with their peers. That has served an evolutionary purpose, and it is important that we do that. It's very, very good to introduce young people to other young people. Many times, however, as parents, we want, let's say if you're living in beautiful Monterey, you want your kids to grow up in Monterey. You want to have your grandkids in Monterey, but maybe your adolescent wants to go to some exotic place like Atascadero, Rancho Cucamonga, or Fresno. So they are moving on because that is good and natural. Encouraging that is wonderful because that increases the dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. So many times depression is understimulation and anxiety is seen as overstimulation. For example, if you are in an environment that is very, very stimulating, let's say if you're in a casino in Las Vegas and all the bells and whistles are going on, that can trigger anxiety in the body. It is total overstimulation. One of the biggest things we're finding right now is with kids at home all the time on Zoom and disconnected from youth groups and friends, we're finding a lot of understimulated people. So all of those little dopamine enhancing, we call those microjoys that we've had all of the time, we're not having those now because we're all practicing social distancing. We're not bumping into our friends at youth group or at mass. We're not seeing our friends at school. So in many ways, we are so understimulated, and a lot of that understimulation is causing depression. That's why it's so important for adolescents right now is to have them out of the house as much as possible, out in nature, practicing social distance and all of that, and keeping them as in touch as possible with their friends. Even if it's just online, on video games, all of that is great. For adolescents, being in touch with their friends on a video game increases, the dopamine increases to the same amount as it does actually seeing them in person. So because remember, it's the primitive thing. If I'm playing with my 6 friends on playing a game, I'm playing Fortnite with my 6 friends, to the brain, it feels, okay, I have these 6 friends, they want to be in a group with me. So dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin are flooding. So we have to watch that understimulation. Now, there's a great line that says, she who gets busy gets better. One of the best ways of handling anxiety and depression is just to stay busy, have things to do. We call sitting, as I do all day, every day, and weekends when I'm teaching, we call sitting is the new smoking. The body was not meant to be seated. It was meant to be active. When you and I are active, especially when we're out and about, when we're exercising, when we're walking, we are producing endorphins. And endorphins is the body's own morphine. So it functions like an antidepressant. So very quickly, when you walk with young people or when you walk with adults, the endorphins kick in, and we see it both as an antidepressant and as an anti-anxiety aid. Even, for example, we know that in clinical trials, adolescents or adults exercising for 3 times a week for as much as 30 minutes, the impact of that walking on the body is the same as many of the common barbiturates or many of the common SSRIs that young adults are using for anxiety or depression, or many of the common benzodiazepines that are being administered. In other words, 30 minutes of exercise 3 times a week minimum is as good in clinical trials as many of the basic drugs that are out there that are administered to young adults. Another thing that we know about exercise, and this works very, very well for young adults, is that when we are exercising, we actually produce this protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So when I'm out there exercising, I am actually growing new neurons in the brain. My hippocampus, remember that's like my filing cabinet of the brain, is actually almost adding in new files. So great thing to do with adolescents is to take them out for a walk. You have the endorphins and you have the BDNF. That's why we know for, youth groups that are active are way more successful than youth groups who are just sort of sitting around looking at each other. The more exercise we put into this, into our programs, the better the effect it is going to be. That's why for hundreds of years, we've gone on pilgrimages. Now we go on hikes. We know how good it makes us feel. Endorphins kick in the minute the heart rate goes up and the body starts sweating. So one of the best things we can do is that. Now, let's look on to number 7. And this is a very big problem that we have today. We say the letter I in the word illness stands for isolation. As I isolate, as I am not around my friends or family, my anxiety and my depression increase. We are social animals. We are designed to be together. We are designed to be in villages. We are designed to be in communities. And for thousands of years, the worst thing you could do to someone is exclude them, throw them out of the village, because for many people that ensured easy death. The person who was kicked out of the kingdom, kicked out of the castle, kicked out of the village, now had to fend for themselves. We even see it in nature, animals get together, birds fly together in flocks. They stay together because the bird who leaves the flock is likely to be the one that's going to be attacked. So this self-imposed isolation that we're all part of now is very, very destructive for us. So we have to look at that. We're called to social distance, not to socially isolate. So even if I'm driving, even if you adolescents are sitting in a car looking at people going in and out of Target, even that to the brain means I'm seeing people. There are people outside. So even if you don't want to take them out to interact with people, at least to get out of the house so that they can see people and be around people. So we say also that the opposite to addiction is connection. The opposite to addiction is connection. And remember, 9 out of 10 addictions start in adolescence, where the young person is feeling isolated. So what we want to do is ensure that they are surrounded by a good community that are supportive of them. One of the great ways to help young people in talking about anxiety and depression is to talk about it in the sense of scales, 1 through 10. So, for example, a young person might say, today I'm at a 5 and my anxiety is at a 5 and I'd like to be at a 4. Or my depression is at a 3 and I'd like to be at a 7. Very, very good to do that. It's very, very good to talk about scales because it makes it manageable. There's a great line, it's here somewhere further on, but we say that which gets measured gets managed. With anxiety and depression, breaking something down into small parts makes it very attainable for the body. So that which gets measured gets managed. So breaking something down into a scale is very, very helpful. Kids will like to say, hey, yesterday I was at a 5 in my depression. Today I'm at a 3. So they will like that sense of achievement because they haven't gotten rid of the depression. They've just gone from a 5 to a 3 by practicing some techniques. This is a big one, and this is in the psycho side. We say feelings become thoughts, thoughts lead to actions. FTA, feelings, thoughts, actions. So what often happens is I will start with a feeling. So my friends don't invite me to the barbecue. So I feel depressed. And the longer I stay in that feeling, that morphs in, as I spend time thinking about that and talking about that in my brain, that neuron is developing and being myelinated. So as I focus on it, that neuron is actually getting bigger. So it morphs into a statement about myself. So I feel depressed becomes I am depressed. And then I do something depressing. I don't get out of bed and shower. And then I feel depressed. So I go back into that feedback loop. So very, very common feedback loop. that people get into. So feelings become thoughts and thoughts become actions, FTA. Similarly, if I feel good, I think I am good and I do something good, and that reinforces the feeling. So a good way is when we see depressive actions in or overly anxiety, actions of anxiety in adolescents, we can sort of help them peel it back to say, okay, this, you didn't shower. What was the thought behind that? And what was the feeling behind that? Very, very manageable. This works beautifully with kids because you can break it down into feelings, thoughts, and actions. Of course, number 10 is very, very important. Don't always trust your feelings. Just because it feels right doesn't mean it is. Let's go back to the basal ganglia and then the striatum in the brain. So for example, if you give me a pizza, I will eat the whole thing. It feels good, even though I know that it's not. Now, because I'm an adult, I will say, oh, hang on, let me just take a slice because I can't afford to eat the whole pizza. I don't need all that sodium and all that cholesterol. But remember, the teenage brain, they are likely to eat the whole pizza because it feels good right now. And remember what we said, neurons that fire together, wire together. So if we don't help them understand pizzas and the joys and sorrows of pizza, those two feelings, those two benefits get wired together, and sometimes that can be very hard to change. All right. Egocentric thought, what is it? This is very, very common in adolescence. Egocentric thought is that feeling that everybody is looking at me or everybody is talking about me. Very, very common in adolescence. For example, if a young person is feeling sad, they will presume everybody else is feeling sad. For example, if I were a 14-year-old and I spill coffee on my shirt, I would think, okay, if I go into school, everybody is looking at my shirt and everybody is talking about my shirt. So we have a lot of egocentric thought when it comes to adolescence, and that egocentric thought can cause anxiety and depression. This is a new concept here, comparanoia. We see it a lot with kids on social media, that they're comparing themselves to other people. They're comparing themselves to their airbrushed friends on Facebook. And as we say, they're comparing and despairing. So comparing and despair. So as I compare, I despair. And now kids can do this 24/7. When I was a kid growing up in Ireland, we didn't have social media, we didn't even have computers, and grew up in a small village in the west of Ireland. We were pretty much all the same. It was a wonderful little community, mostly dairy farmers. But on Thursday evenings, I remember the Brady Bunch would come on, and I would look at them. I say, oh my gosh, look at these American kids. Look at their big hair, their big teeth, their happy families, and look at it in when they have problems, they sort them out in 30 minutes, allowing for commercial breaks. I want to be in California, and here I am. But back as it, so that for me was only 30 minutes on a Thursday evening. So I would compare and despair and not feel great about the situation I was living in back in rural Ireland when I saw their big, beautiful lives. Now, were this today with Facebook, I would be looking at the equivalent of the Brady Bunch 24/7, and not just the Brady family, but hundreds of other families. And I would constantly be overstimulated, which means I'm over comparing, and in comes this comparanoia that I don't feel good enough. And very, very common, as you know, with young people. You know, with young people, when they post a picture and they get a like, they get also a dopamine hit. The basal ganglia lights up like a Christmas tree. So as they get more and more likes, more and more hits from dopamine, and that makes them feel good about themselves. If they don't get likes, as you know, many young people will actually take down their pictures because they get depressed because they haven't got that hit of dopamine. All right. Very important is to understand that kids are, you know, especially for adults, that kids are having a hard time, not that they're giving you a hard time. So many times kids are moody, they're non-communicative, and many times parents will personalize it. My son is giving me a hard time, my daughter is giving me a hard time. With adolescents, we want to understand, no, they're actually having a hard time. Boys tend to be more behavioral in their expressions. Girls tend to be more verbal. So many times when you're talking with adolescent girls, it is easier to have a conversation with an adolescent girl than sometimes to have with an adolescent boy. But the best way sometimes to work with boys is give us a task, you know, have us go for a walk, build something together, watch a game together like the Lakers the other night, and yay, go Lakers. So something like that that involves an activity is a sure way to access or to start a conversation, particularly with adolescent boys. So for girls, we say they can talk and talk, they have that gift. For guys, you need to start with a task and then the talk happens. All right. Self-compassion is very important. One of the great things we can do as leaders is give kids, take the focus off self-esteem and move towards the focus of self-compassion. 15 is very, very important. If parents are concerned about their kids, or youth leaders are concerned about the kids, it's very important to select the right time and place. The ideal time to talk about kids' problems is in the morning, if at all possible, on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, never at night. One of the reasons for that is the amygdala. Let's go back to the amygdala in the limbic system back here. The amygdala is extra sensitive when it is dark outside. So the amygdala is extra sensitive, so that causes information to be processed in a very, very threatening way. For example, with Halloween coming up, we know that if we go to a Halloween haunted house at 9 a.m., it is not very, we're not that scared. But if we go at 9 p.m., the same haunted house is absolutely very, very scary. Walk and talk is very important. Very important with kids is to focus on what is working well, how they're doing well. 19 is important. Give them a way out. Very important is 22. We talk about the guide on the side or the sage on the stage. The guide on the side is the supportive person accompanying the kids through their depression and anxiety. The sage on the stage is that more advanced person who can help them understand what's going through. So many times the adult is the sage on the stage with that wisdom. Many times their peers act as the guide on the side. Tone is very important in dealing with adolescence. Going slow and low is very, very good. Many times depression morphs as anger turned inwards. If kids are in a house, in a family in which they feel they can't express themselves, many times that anger turns inward. So if they feel, if I get angry with mom or dad are going to get divorced, or mom and dad are going to punish me, many times they start moving in towards a period of anxiety and depression. All right, so listen, we're going to get ready now. We have a lot more on that slide, but you will have that at home. And now we're moving on to some questions. A lot of questions have come in, so I'm happy to answer those questions as best I can.
Thank you, Paul, for all of your comments, and everything you said is so relevant to the lives of our youth. And as we were going through this and you were going through your talk, I was watching the chat beneath the YouTube video, and one of the things that came up was talking about the relationship between depression and energy and kind of how we function on a day-to-day basis. I know that you hit that with your talks about getting out there and kind of just watching that the world is still functioning. But as people who work with youth, or maybe there's some parents who are watching us tonight, what are some little things that we can do when we start to see young people kind of retreat from the activity of daily life, something that is so easy to do with all of the protocols we've put in place with regard to the virus?
Very good. Well, firstly, we want to see, why are they retreating? Are they retreating just because they need more sleep? We know adolescents need 9 to 10 hours a day to sleep. So we want to see, are they actually tired? Or are they retreating from everybody? Are they just retreating from mom and dad, but they're still in contact with their friends? So we want to see, is it systemic? Are they retreating from everybody? Or are they retreating from siblings? So firstly, we always need to look at the behavior first, and what need does the behavior meet? So we want to see and ask them, okay, why are you retreating? What is the benefit of retreating? Because there might be a benefit. The need, the purpose itself might meet a need. Once again, we just ask them, what's going on? What's going on? Are they retreating just because they're overwhelmed, or are they retreating just because they need more sleep? Sleep is very important, and our kids do not get enough sleep. We adults do not get enough sleep. Adolescents, ideally, melatonin in the brain kicks in for adolescents later than it does for kids or for adults. So adolescents many times will retreat. Many times we see a lot of retreating in the mornings from adolescents because they're tired. They are tired. Generally, the ideal adolescent goes to, not that this is what we want in families, but the adolescent brain tends to shut down around midnight and then starts waking up around 9 or 10 in the morning. So we have to look also at the time of day. So look at the whole family, look at the behavior. Don't judge it. You want to find out, what need does the behavior meet? That's the first question. What need does it meet? Or what purpose does it serve? So we need to investigate a little bit more. If they're not coming out at all, then we have to see, is there something else going on? Is there something going on medically? We have to start asking other questions as well. Okay.
If I was a young person who was watching this tonight, and I was feeling some of the things that you were talking about, but I didn't quite know how to talk to my parents about it. Maybe their mentality or their background as it comes to issues like this is a little bit different than the perspective that I've been taught. What tips might you have for a young person in terms of trying to express these emotional concerns to parents who might not always have a listening ear?
Well done. Now, to the brain, the brain doesn't care who I talk to. The brain just wants me to talk. So maybe I can't talk to mom and dad, and that's fine. It's the old idea of, that old expression, takes a village to raise a child. So many times we're finding out, well, who can you talk to? Who is there for that listening ear? Who is your sage on the stage? Who is the guide on the side? It could be an uncle, it could be an aunt, it could be a neighbor, it could be, many times for kids, their first port of call is not mom and dad, and that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. But what we want to have this idea is that the village raises the child. And in fact, many times parents see that their kids don't want to talk to them. So we say, well, bring in an aunt or an uncle. Who are they likely to talk to? Because it's not about who they talk to, it's about talking. And many times for young adults too, it's the resource of knowing even helplines that they can call. So the brain doesn't care who I talk to. The brain just needs someone. It just needs me to talk to someone. So that's where, we as youth leaders can give kids lots of resources. They can be online resources. They can be 1-800 numbers. It really doesn't matter. So it's good to start first with a helping person. Maybe I can process out a little bit that way. And then, then I can start with mom and dad. But think about it as if you had a pet, if you had a cat and you stopped feeding the cat and Mrs. Smith down the street started feeding your cat, the cat just says, hey, I'm being fed down there, and the cat just goes off. We sort of need to do the same thing, is just find good, safe adults that you can talk to, are good, safe resources.
Many of the people who are watching us tonight might actually be those safe adults to whom youth can go. And so the other side of that question then becomes, if we are those safe adults, what's the most healthy way for us to respond to a young person who is coming to us and explaining how they're feeling, and also feeling apprehensive about going to talk to their parents or their close trusted family members? How can we respond and be supportive?
Oh, fantastic question. Fantastic question. On the second page down at the end, I think it's number 52, we have what we call A, B, C, and me, So that's the way we do an assessment as leaders. We say, okay, firstly, the young person wants to be A, for accepted, 2, to belong, feel, okay, if I'm talking to you, I feel connected with you. Also, B is also for believe. I want you to believe me. C is in control. So the young person will want to feel that they have some control as to what they do next. Hey, do you want to talk to your mom? Do you want to talk to your dad? Or who would it be good to talk to right now? And then A, B, C, and me. Me is for meaning. They will want to know that the next step actually has a benefit. so that talking to their mom or talking to their dad or talking to someone else actually has a meaning. But firstly, we thank them, but it's a great way of assessing what the needs usually are. You know, A, B, C, and me, it's on, I think it's number 55 or something. But you welcome them and you give them some control over the conversation as well. You give them some control over where to go next. Absolutely. Resources, resources, and resources, though. That's always the best thing. Remember, tools, when I have tools, my frontal lobe here is my dopamine level goes up. Education, my dopamine level goes up. So I'm much more likely to be resilient. Information makes us resilient and less resistant. So sometimes as youth leaders, what we can do is almost role play a conversation with mom and dad, because we want them to make them less resistant to mom and dad and more resilient. Sometimes with young people, we find those words, I can't, won't, and don't. So we want to sort of move around those the goal is make young people more resilient than resistant.
One of our questioners has asked a question about what if we're working with a young person who's dealing with coming from a family situation, maybe perhaps a broken home, or one where a valued family member has been absent for some time, and the youth is coming to us asking how can they cope with that absence. And I think back to the point you were making about comparing ourselves to one another and perhaps comparing the images of our own family to the images that are presented in the media. So how can we work with youth to affirm their own family situation?
Right. So they're coming to you because maybe the family, there's just a one parent home, or they're missing their mom and dad, is it?
Right.
Or?
Perhaps there's a parent who's been absent, or and they're feeling that absence pretty profoundly. How can we help a young person kind of deal with that?
Great question. So in other words, how do we help a young person with loss and grief? So,
Yes, perhaps the parent is maybe still alive, but not in the
sure.
picture.
Great question. Well, what we always want to do is we say, build what is strong, then fix what is wrong. So dad may be absent, and maybe the child is just focusing on dad and dad not being there. And that can be depressing and distressing for the child, but we want to suddenly say, like, what other dads are there? Who else is around you? Who is there in your life? Who is active in your life? So firstly, we want to focus on the resources and build what is strong first, because that moves them into feeling that they're competent, they have control over, their access with these supportive adults in their life. So that's always a good place to start first, not just to jump into the grief. Remember, we want to give them tools first. And that always starts by doing an assessment to see where the areas of strength are, who are these connecting adults, and also we can help them with grief work. And there is so much, there are so many resources when it comes to grief work. You also want to know the child to ask the child, they may miss a dad, they may miss their father, but maybe they miss being parented. They may not miss the actual person, but they may miss the person that, they may miss the parenting role. So we try and sometimes get that met by other good supportive people. Resources, once again, and seeing who, making them feel richer than they actually perceive that they are at the beginning. We say too blessed to be stressed. That's always a great line. We want them counting their blessings. That actually helps bring down that level of cortisol.
One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking was, under normal circumstances, so many of our young people spend the majority of their time at school with their teachers and with other people on campus. So maybe you could give some of the people here an insight into what kind of services are offered to youth at school who go to public schools, if they're also demonstrating these mental health struggles. How do schools respond when students are showing some of these signs of anxiety or depression? And is there a way that we can incorporate some of those strategies into our own ministry?
Absolutely. Well, in many ways, it will depend on the school district, but But most I think of the resources, for example, if number one, if the child self-reports, says to their teacher, I am struggling with anxiety and depression, many times, as you know, they're sent to the school counselor, and the school counselor then does an assessment to see, they'll do that safety assessment, and then they normally look at resources that are there in the local community. So, I mean, what I would encourage you almost to do is see what the counselors in your high school have on offer in your local area. Many times the counseling office or the nurse's office in an elementary school, or even your pediatrician's office, they're many times the best places to get the informal and formal resources that are there. One of the fantastic resources that are always there for connectivity are sports, you know. I mean, I know now it's that little bit harder to play sports, but consistently when kids are involved in any type of sport, that's one sort of activity sometimes that we're sort of almost dismissive of, but it is powerful in the lives of young people, belonging to a team and feeling part of something while actively exercising.
In your talk, one of the things that you mentioned was the importance of serotonin production in the development, the emotional health of young people. Thinking about kind of just the way that young people live and you know, maybe where they're getting some of their sustenance, are there things that we can do in our own daily life and our diets to help promote serotonin production internally?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's where that mind-mouth muscle comes in. You know, what we know with young people of levels of serotonin go up when they're listening to music. When they are in nature, for example. Now we're talking about, and it's on number 50, I believe here, number 56, forest bathing is a new thing, very, very popular in Japan, where you just bring young people out and they're just in the forest. And actually there's a chemical that's emitted by trees called phytoncides. And that chemical actually, it's emitted by trees, but it actually improves our mood for up to 10 days. So sometimes just bringing kids out into nature is very, very good. Serotonin is totally increased. Serotonin and oxytocin is increased by listening to music. A great way when you're trying to understand what kids are going through sometimes is to have them give you some of the music they listen to. You know, kids are super fans. You know, recently a young girl asked me if I was a Swifter. I thought she meant, am I good at dusting furniture? But she actually meant, do I follow Taylor Swift? You know, Taylor Swift has 60 million people following her on Twitter. I have 6, she has 60 million. In other words, when people feel they're connected to someone, when they're moving, when they're singing, serotonin goes up. We know how kids love concerts because it increases the serotonin and it also increases the dopamine and it also increases the oxytocin. So music is a great way, especially emotional music. We know that's why, you know, music companies, they create all these boy bands who are singing to all of these young people about how they are loved and wonderful. You know, that's a serotonin rush, a dopamine rush, and an oxytocin rush. So kids are super fans that want to be connected. The biggest way really with connecting with, for young people to connect, is music, creative activities, exciting activities that are surrounded by people that they feel very much in community with. Also avoiding fatty foods, of course, like French fries and you know, all of the, you know, that good stuff that we know that we all need to do. To watch that. Watching our caffeine intake, of course, is very important. Watching our sugar intake is very important. A lot of kids are on these sugary drinks, you know, the frappuccinos, all of that. If our sugar level goes up, our body turns that into glucose, which in turn can manifest itself as symptoms of anxiety. So absolutely watching high sugar, high carbs, you know, very, very important. Diet and exercise, absolutely important.
So many of the people who have tuned in tonight, we work with youth and we strive to imbue in youth a more healthy relationship with God, with the God who loves them. And so I guess I would ask you, what kind of reflection techniques can we incorporate into our interactions with youth to help them kind of just reflect on what's going on and what they're feeling internally that they might not be expressing, especially considering that our primary means of interacting with youth right now is this very means right now via Zoom, which is so intangible in so many ways.
Absolutely. When you go down through the second page here, we have lots and lots of things in our Catholic tradition that absolutely help young people connect with God. What certain things like teaching young people prayers, repetitive prayers, actually repetitive prayers trigger in the parasympathetic nervous system. There's a great line by Bishop Barron who said, prayers are a great way to move us into prayer. So repetitive prayers are very, very good. Ironically, one of the best prayers we have is actually the rosary. You know, when the brain is involved in micro movements, like going through the rosary, the cerebellum gets activated and my level of serotonin increases. So prayers that are grounding are very, very important. Repetitive grounding prayers are very, very important because they slow down the racing heart. Mantras are very good. The types of music like Taise music is very, very good. With adolescents, what's very good is our faith-based music that is very connective oriented, that talks about love and compassion, as opposed to sometimes our more theological hymns that might be a little bit lofty for young people to understand. We see that in many churches in which young people are just swaying to music for a lot of the service. Having our young people become more familiar with good faith-based music is very, very important. But repetitive prayer is very, very good. And what's very good too, and a lot of young people that I work with like this, many times I'll have them go through the Psalms. And as you know, we have 150 of them. So sometimes just to go through the Psalms even and find a Psalm that speaks to them. As we know in the Psalms, every emotion under the sun is pretty much codified in a Psalm. So sometimes just even guiding them through so that they find the Psalm that speaks to them. One of the great things about the Psalm, it starts off with trauma and then it jumps into treatment. So it actually follows a very good model. It's God, you have abandoned me, but I trust in your mercy, and so on and so forth. So we see all of these beautiful problems worked out in the Psalms. So Psalms can work very, very well for young people, reciting them, having them pick their own, having them choose their own, and almost having the Psalm, speak for them in the same way as a song would speak for them. So we have lots, also in our Catholic tradition, anything that feeds the senses, incense, candles, all of the wonderful sacramentals that we have are extremely important for bringing down anxiety and depression. Meditation is key. I have some links there at the bottom to contemplativeoutreach.org, which is very good. There's a wonderful app called Pray As You Go. It's a free app from the Jesuits in the UK. Kids download it and it's a guided meditation every day. I use it myself every day. Pray As You Go. It's a little app. It's from the Jesuits in the UK. Another good website is naturalhigh.org. It's about getting kids out in nature and getting them experience that natural high that comes from being in the great outdoors, or as St. Francis would say, God's outdoor chapel.
And I think our last question for tonight is going to be just a question about, as we very much live in the present, but look to the future and look hopefully to resuming our person-to-person work with youth. How would you guide us as to strategize about getting youth back involved in person-to-person interactions and honoring the emotions that they felt during this whole shelter-in-place time, and how can we kind of strategize for the future while being mindful of the circumstances and the ramifications of the present?
Absolutely. Well, as much as possible, getting them into socially distant events that are, that we're already seeing it with the outdoor masses, that for kids to see, to be in the presence of people is, as we said, very good for the serotonin and the dopamine. So to begin right now, what's very important is that we start planning, and, even though we don't know when we're going to have our Kairos retreats, I think actually putting them down on the calendar would be very, very good. The brain can't distinguish between me going on a Kairos retreat or a parish retreat in 2 years, or whether I'm going on it right now. The brain, so future planning, in which you lock in a lot of very good things, tricks the brain into thinking it's happening right now. That's why strategizing is very, very important. Kids thinking they're going to youth day in 2 years, the brain thinks it's happening right now. The level of dopamine and serotonin goes up. So planning with details and creativity above all. I hope that helps.
So thank you so much, Dr. Brogan. Did we hear again how viewers can get those resources?
Yes, there is a link on the bottom of the YouTube channel with those resources. So the link should go up right underneath. And those 3 resources that we spoke about, they should be there. And thank you very much, Jordan, for doing that. And Sam, thank you also for doing that as well.
So before we close this evening, I would like to introduce to you a person who, in a very short period of time, I have come to know as energetic, dedicated, gentle, joyful, and very dedicated to serving others. He's Father Gerson Espinosa, and he has been newly appointed by Bishop Danny as our Director of Youth and Young Adult Ministry in our diocese. Please welcome him and pray for his extremely important ministry. And I'll now turn the screen over to Father Gerson.
Thank you so much, Robert, for that wonderful intro. I feel very grateful of those beautiful words. I want to give thanks to Paul, who joined us in this evening with all these important insights and tools for our work with youth. Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time to be with us and share all your knowledge and experience in this field. Thank you. I really appreciate your help. I would like to give thanks to our formation team, Jordan, Robert, Father Louis, Father Gabriel, who were working hard to plan and organize all the details for this workshop. As Robert said at the beginning, we have been working in a very fast way, a very short time, but it stands big of all those people who are part of our diocesan team that you will have the opportunity to meet through our Facebook page and our Instagram. I want also to give thanks to our media team, Samuel, Scott, Jesse, Angel, Osvaldo, who were working hard to find the best way to communicate and to stream this opportunity for our ministry. So thank you so much to all those people who were working for this workshop, those who were backstage preparing everything. There are a couple of events coming for us. We are going to have this workshop, the same topic, in Spanish on November 4th at 7 p.m. We also have our online Diocesan Youth Day with Paul J. King on Friday, November 20th. The Day of Worship and Prayer in Spanish with Athenas on December 3rd. And we will close this year 2020 with our online Advent retreat with El Padrecito on December 19th. All this information you can find it on our Facebook page and our Instagram account, Catholic Youth Diocese of Monterey. Please join us, please follow us to keep you informed of our events. Thank you to all of you for being here present with us and supporting the Office of Youth Ministry. Robert.
Yes, so I think we have our closing prayer. So Father Louis is offered to do our closing prayer, and we join you.
Let us give thanks to God for all the blessings and the benefits that we received tonight. Thank you for our speaker. Thank you for all the people who are in charge of many other jobs in our team, and we thank God for this beautiful night. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God, our loving Father, as we finish up this event, we want to express our gratitude to you. We thank you for our speaker, our listeners, and for the wisdom that you imparted to us today. May we always be reminded that you are always on our side and that your love for us is eternal. We put our trust and confidence in you. Guide and help us to walk in your ways that we may not give room for any doubt and anxiety. Protect all the young people of the world, especially those who are experiencing anxiety and depression. May you be our focus in life, our hope in difficult times, and our peace in this chaotic world, so that we may be your effective instrument of your love to the world. And help us also, our team, that we may continue to work for your glory in our diocese. And we ask all of this in the name of Jesus, our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you very much, Paul.
Good night, everyone.